In the darkness that enveloped the small town of Okoes, Michigan, the sound of banging on the front door suddenly rang out, awakening the stillness of the night. "Hello? Is there anybody there? Hello? Can you hear me?" The police officer's call echoed into the air, strong and urgent. Jenny Morrison, a woman known for her strength and determination, hurried towards the door, worry sparkling in her eyes. Meanwhile, a female officer calmly walked to the porch and carefully looked through the window. The living room light flickered through the gap, revealing the silhouette of Claire, Jenny's 6-year-old daughter, crouching in the dark corner of the room. "I think I can see someone inside," the officer told her colleague, her voice filled with worry but firmness. "It looks urgent. Can they open the door?" Jenny, after a moment's hesitation, locked the door and opened it. Light poured in from outside, illuminating her tense face. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we received a call concerning the safety of everyone in this house," the officer explained, his eyes gauging Jenny's reactions. In that moment, Jenny felt a strange sense of relief, knowing that someone was worried about their safety. She led the officers into the house, through the living room where Claire, still bewildered and silent, sat huddled next to her toys. Claire is usually very quiet, but she is a delicate and sensitive child, Jenny said with a tired but grateful smile. As the night progressed, the officer's presence brought not only safety but also comfort to Jenny and Claire. Amidst the lights and shadows, a story about community concern and the power of courage began to be written. In the mother and daughter's small house in Okoes, the rays of sunlight shining through the window seemed optimistic and radiant, but in the classroom, the atmosphere was thick with a kind of unexplained sadness. Claire, sitting in the back row, with her eyes down, between the rows of text on the textbook, but her mind was not there. Mrs. Singh, the gentle and observant teacher, couldn't help but notice the change in Claire's attitude. Her sensitive heart had begun to ring little warnings, signs that anyone else might have missed. The understanding teacher knew that behind the cold exterior of her quiet student, there was a hidden story. Every morning, Claire comes to school with a melancholy expression, like a painting with fragments of colorful happiness, not to mention the sad memories she carries with her. Mrs. Singh knew that this student had experienced many challenges, shocks that she hid inside. But she cannot interfere, cannot invade Claire's private life. Respect for the boundaries of colleagues and students, has always been her top principle. However, there is a sincerity, a deep concern, that always oozes from Mrs. Singh's compassionate soul. The teacher couldn't help but wonder about Claire's life outside of the classroom, couldn't help but feel worried for this mysterious student. On a beautiful day, when the sky was as blue as her understanding, Mrs. Singh decided to visit Claire. Not to seek an opening, but to let her know that there is a helping hand if she needs it. The teacher knows that every word, every gesture, can be a bright spot, a path leading to discovery and healing for the wounded soul. But will Claire have the courage to face her past and accept help from her gentle teacher? Or will she continue to hide the pain behind a fake smile, living in her own world? Their stories, like two parallel rivers, whether they meet or not, can only be written through their actions, decisions, and the most sincere moments of life. Mrs. Singh, with her compassionate soul and acumen, sensed that there was a dark secret silently existing in Claire's family life. Although she respected boundaries and did not want to interfere in her students' personal lives, it was unthinkable that such secrecy could reach the point of causing fear to her. On a beautiful sunny day, as the light shined through the window, Mrs. Singh glanced toward Jenny, another girl in her class. But what startled her was not Jenny's normal appearance, but the dark look peeking out from under her sunglasses. A cold and gloomy look made Mrs. Singh worry about her students' mental and physical health. Unable to bear the worry, Mrs. Singh decided to approach Jenny during the hour. With eyes full of concern, she asked if everything was okay, hoping that the girl would open up and share with her. However, Jenny only smiled awkwardly and lied, explaining that the black eye was just a silly, insignificant accident. Mrs. Singh's mood now became more confused than ever. Is the girl hiding a horrifying truth behind her lie? And will she continue to pursue the truth, or will she give up? Mrs. Singh's heart was in turmoil when she realized that Jenny Morrison had strangely dropped Claire off at school. The dark circles around Jenny's eyes could not escape the attention of the compassionate teacher. She decided to find out the truth behind that bruise on the student's face. Parents became concerned when Mrs. Singh approached Jenny looking worried. She gently asked if everything was okay, but Jenny's answer was an obvious lie. "Oh, it's nothing, Mrs. Singh. I just accidentally walked into a door," the girl explained. Although her heart ached at Jenny's obvious fabrication, she decided to trust her student's words throughout the day. However, thoughts of that black eye and her constant uneasiness lingered constantly, increasing with each passing moment. Every morning, Mrs. Singh anxiously awaits Claire's arrival, hoping for the best, but unable to stop worrying about the worst. On a gloomy Monday morning, when Claire's father dropped her off at school, Gates's relief swept over Mrs. Singh like a cold wind, as she saw her students' pale clothes and frail bodies. The girl looked weaker than usual, and this made Mrs. Singh feel uneasy. That morning, when Jenny wasn't present, the teacher couldn't help but think it was strange. She only met Mr. Morrison once, on the girl's first day at school, and since then, Mr. Morrison has avoided eye contact and shunned all contact. As Ms. Singh rushed towards the truck, Mr. Morrison did not hesitate to jump in to avoid meeting anyone. However, Ms. Singh couldn't help but look straight into Mr. Morrison's eyes, wanting to learn more about the secret he was keeping. As she helped Claire settle into her seat, Mrs. Singh noticed something strange protruding from her sock. Curiosity prompted her to bend down and carefully pull it out, even though she didn't know what was waiting under her hands. The intrigue and drama begins when Mrs. Singh sees what is hidden under Claire's socks, and whether it is part of the secret she is keeping to herself or not. Ms. Singh gently approached Claire, her eyes full of concern and curiosity. Helping the child sit at the table, she tried to assess how he was feeling that day. As she knelt down to adjust Claire's sock, she noticed something sticking out of it. A crumpled piece of paper, stuffed tightly into Claire's tiny sock. Her hand shook as she opened the paper. Teachers are worried, not knowing what will happen. Claire, being a sensitive child, had to examine the opening of the paper herself. Mrs. Singh's eyes widened in shock when she read the message scrawled in Jenny's hasty handwriting. Every word gives people chills. Finally, is it true? How could she understand what was going on? Claire is young and cannot explain anything. Mrs. Singh's heart sank when she realized that her suspicions were indeed well-founded. She tried to hold back tears, writing to Jenny. The story was becoming more attractive and dramatic. Ms. Singh's hand trembled, anxiety spreading through her mind as she picked up the crumpled piece of paper. She didn't dare to expect what was about to happen. Along with Claire's sensitivity, a feeling of anxiety piled on her mind. Mrs. Singh's eyes opened wide, shocked by the hasty, but extremely clear, writing on the blurry paper. It was a message from Jenny, but what could have made her write like that? Every word on the paper makes people feel frozen, unable to believe what they read. Ultimately, is it true? How can Claire understand what's going on? The child is young and cannot explain anything. Ms. Singh's heart shrank, realizing that her suspicions were not unfounded. She tried to hold back tears, writing to Jenny. The story was becoming more fascinating and dramatic than ever. Overwhelmed by the weight of the situation and the responsibility now placed on her shoulders, Ms. Singh's eyes widened as she read the desperate plea written in Jenny's handwriting. Call the police, don't send Kaylee home. Shock and anxiety filled Mrs. Singh's heart as she realized the severity of the situation. In that situation, she discreetly hid the paper, because she didn't want to raise alarm in front of Kaylee. Did your mother leave this there? She asked Claire. The girl could only nod with a heavy heart. She decided to act immediately, determined to protect them both. In a chaotic mood, Ms. Singh hurriedly picked up the phone and selected the police number, each minute passing like a heavy stone in her heart. The tension increased as she waited for the sound of the phone answering from the other side. Long, tense moments passed, but no one answered on the other side. Mrs. Singh felt like her heart was beating so hard, she couldn't wait any longer. She quickly dialed the number again, hoping that this time someone would answer the phone. Finally, the bell rang through the phone, and a voice came from the other side of the relief line. She could not contain her emotions as she recounted the situation she had just discovered, and asked for help immediately. Claire's gaze as she looked down, emotion radiating from her eyes. Mrs. Singh's eyes met what she knew would be a big fight. But for Claire, for Jenny, she will be the ultimate warrior, ready to face anything to protect them. Jenny and Kaylee are rescued from further harm, but Mrs. Singh feels responsible for preventing something worse from happening. A surge of urgency spurred her into immediate action. She showed the note to the school principal, who shared her warning and suggested they needed intervention from the authorities. Principal Bagan said to the principal who was watching over Kaylee. Mrs. Singh called the emergency number, her voice trembling as she reported the distressing situation to Police Principal Baggins. Mr. Baggins' anger was overwhelming when he received the call. A short, stern man, he loved teaching and was passionate about it. But now, the responsibility of protecting students was weighing heavily on his shoulders, and he knew he had to act immediately. Educating children who don't attend Mrs. Singh's school is a stressful challenge. Some people shouldn't be parents, and their tantrums often appear within just a few minutes. But this time, law enforcement came to the school, and their concerns were reflected in their eyes as they read the notes. Will they be able to help in time? Authorities rushed to Morrison's address a few blocks away. It was an old area and the house was dilapidated. Mrs. Singh accompanies them to Claire's house, where they find the door locked and no response from inside. Only filled with despair. In the darkness of the old house, they sensed the smell of dampness and ruin, but there was no sign of Claire or Jenny. Anxiety grips them as they face a mystery that may contain unforeseen dangers. The atmosphere in the old house became tense as they shouted Claire's name, begging for a sign of life. Anxiety spreads when there is no internal response. They tried the back door, but it was locked. Are there any other windows that open? An officer asked them, but the response remained silent. An haunting silence greeted their call, until a faint noise rang out from inside. The sound was like something heavy hitting the floor. Everyone turned to face the direction of the noise. Coming from what the main officer said was moving towards the front door. I heard it, said a sobbing, emotional voice, trying to hold back tears and anxiety. That's when they realized that trouble and danger had begun, and they had to act immediately to save Claire and Jenny. Mrs. Singh tried to look inside, but it was dark. The police knew they couldn't waste any more time. They used force to break down the door to reveal a scene that would forever be etched in their memories. Mrs. Singh screamed in shock. It was a bloody scene. Jenny lay on the floor, beaten and bleeding, the pain evident in every bruise. The room showed signs of a violent struggle, testament to the suffering she had endured. The police officer ran up to her, shining his flashlight in her face. She's breathing, they said, we need to get her out of here. They know that every moment of reckoning is important, and now is the time to act, to save Jenny and put her out of this miserable situation. Quick, he's waking up, Mrs. Singh said, trying to keep Jenny awake. Jenny, can you hear me? She tried to comfort the beaten woman. Claire's okay, she's safe, she said, trying to bring some hope to the distraught woman. Police quickly called an ambulance to ensure Jenny's safety and immediate medical attention. While medical staff tended to Jenny's injuries, the police were determined to bring the abuser to justice. Meanwhile, back at school, Claire remains blissfully unaware of the chaotic events going on around her. Life went on, but the waves shook an entire community, and it will forever be part of an unforgettable story. The principal sat Claire down in a corner of the room, where there was soft light and a warm atmosphere. He gently explained that Claire's mother was hurt, but help was on the way and everything would be okay. Claire's wide eyes were filled with worry and confusion in her innocence. She realizes that something is wrong, and her insecurities begin to extend beyond her adorable, admiring outlook. Shattered by the painful truth about her family's situation, Claire felt like a heavy brick weighed down on her shoulders. She knew that her life was about to change, but she could not have imagined the severity of the truth that awaited her. But this is not the end of the story. For both Claire and her mother, the journey has just begun. The news about her mother's condition was a difficult pill for Claire to swallow. At her age, she wasn't usually in such a situation, and from a child's perspective, she couldn't understand the harshness of the real world. She only felt loss and confusion, not knowing what the paper said and that she had once been part of a world full of tragedy and contradiction. Claire's trembling eyes sparkled with uncontrollable tears, and the principal could only imagine what she must endure at this moment. However, the worst is what is yet to come. In the thick air of the room, everyone knew that Claire was too young to understand what was going on around her, but the picture of anxiety and tension could not be hidden. The girl could feel the flashes of light in the worried eyes of the adults around her, and each of their tears was like a word of fear and insecurity. Soon, when the girl grows up, she will understand why her father doesn't come home, why her mother is so miserable. It would be a terrible shock, a bitter truth that she could not avoid. But that doesn't mean things will get easier. Even after all this is over, the damage has been done and it will take many more years to heal the heartbreaking wounds in the minds and souls of Claire and her family. Faced with the bitter truth of life, they will have to walk in darkness and search for light. The journey ahead will not be easy, but with help and support from the surrounding community, they will be able to overcome all challenges and face the future with hope and faith. During the tense explanation, Claire did not utter a single word. She stood there, her eyes filled with tears but determined, watching the principal's every move. Her big round eyes reflected fear and anticipation, while her trembling lips seemed to suppress the storm of emotions inside. The atmosphere in the room became heavy when the principal stopped speaking, his face pale as if he had witnessed a ghost. Suddenly, Claire asked, her voice trembling but full of determination, "Is my mother okay?" Tears began to roll down her cheeks, each drop containing pain and worry. The principal looked at her with concern, knowing he was about to deliver news that no words could have prepared Claire for. He sighed, gathering all his strength to face her pleading eyes, "Claire, your mother." Looking into Claire's eyes full of anticipation and fear, the principal felt heavy. Standing before this young girl, who had to face so many storms in one day, he knew he had to be a strong shoulder for her to lean on. "Claire, your mother has been taken to the hospital," he began, his voice firm and trying to reassure. "The doctors are doing their best. You have to be strong, okay?" Claire nodded, tears still in her eyes, but in her eyes, a glimmer of hope. That's when the principal knew he couldn't delay talking about her father any longer. He sighed, searching each word carefully before pronouncing it. "And, you need to know this, that your father has been arrested. He'll probably be in prison for the next few years." As soon as the words ended, Claire collapsed in her chair, her hands clutching the armrests. She stared into space, eyes wide open, as if trying to digest every word he had just said. The principal came closer and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Do you hear me, Claire? Either way, everything's going to be okay. We'll get through all of this. You're not alone." In the room, the air was thick with emotion, the principal's every word echoed like distant promises. He knew that no words could ease the pain Claire was going through, but he also knew that he had to do his best to protect and support her in the difficult days ahead. And Claire, though not ready to face all that awaits, begins to feel the strength of his support. In the dark night, when the hospital seemed to sleep in silence, the doctors and nurses worked tirelessly at Jenny's bedside, hoping to restore stability to the woman who was fighting for her life. Every minute, every second. The cold light in the ICU room could not obscure the warmth and steadfastness of Mrs. Singh's small figure, a woman with a gentle smile and eyes full of hope. Mrs. Singh, although she only met Jenny and her family under these difficult circumstances, has become an indispensable spiritual support for them. Even though she did not know her personally, she did not hesitate to devote her time and effort to ensure Jenny received the best care. Every time she had the opportunity, she quietly prayed beside her hospital bed, hoping for healing hands to not only help Jenny recover from her illness but also help her regain her spirit after severe trauma. To Claire, Mrs. Singh is not only a supporter, but also a beacon of light in the darkness of despair. She became the friend and family member that Claire needed right now. "You are not alone," she told Claire often, her voice warm and firm, "we will get through this together." And when the principal is called to the hospital, there is only one person who can make Mrs. Singh leave Jenny's side. That's when she knew there was someone else who needed her more at this time. She hurriedly found the principal. Her eyes were sad but still steadfast, conveying a wordless message that no matter the storm, she would never back down, would always be there to help, to give wings to the most fragile hopes. The reunion at the hospital is not only a confrontation with life's challenges but also an affirmation that in the heart of every person there is an unbelievable strength to confront difficulties, no matter how great. Where Mrs. Singh, with her resilience and kindness, became a symbol of perseverance and hope, not only for Jenny and Claire, but for everyone who witnessed this story. In a room filled with the smell of disinfectant and the sound of medical machines constantly echoing, Jenny's situation seemed unlikely to improve. The second week has passed without any signs of improvement from her, making everyone on the medical team as well as her family very sad. People began to wonder whether this young mother could overcome her cruel fate. On a quiet evening, when the only light left in the hospital room, Jenny suddenly became worse. The scene unfolding before Claire's eyes was nothing short of a nightmare. Her mother, the young woman she loved, was struggling with each breath. In a moment of despair, Claire stood by the bed, clasped her hands, closed her eyes and did something she had not done in a long time. She began to pray. Claire's prayer is not just a whisper in the dark night, but also the most sincere cry for help from the heart of a child who is afraid of losing his mother. She begged for her mother to be able to escape the danger, to see her mother's smile again, to be able to hold her mother's hand and say that everything would be okay. The hospital room suddenly became incredibly quiet, with only the sound of Jenny's panting and the steady sound of the ventilator. In that space, Claire felt a strong presence of love and hope, as if an invisible force was protecting her mother. A few seconds later, the miracle happened. The signs on the gauges began to change, slowly giving hope. Although it's not yet clear, doctors are starting to see small improvements, a sure sign that Jenny may be on the road to recovery. In a room filled with anxiety, Claire's prayer became a flame of hope. Shining in the darkness of despair, reminding everyone that, even in the harshest of circumstances, hope always exists. In the chaos of the emergency room, the internal speakers rang out urgent orders, and the nurses quickly carried out the instructions with minute urgency. Medical machines beeped continuously, each sound was a heartbeat of thousands of lingering hopes. But for Mrs. Singh, time seemed to slow down, every movement around her seemed to be prolonged. In the cold neon light of the hospital room, she stood quietly in a corner, separate from the activities around her. Her eyes were wide open, following every move of the doctors, but her mind was lost in another place. A space of the past. Images of that day, the day everything changed, began to appear. She remembered the moment she received the notice that she needed to go to the hospital, the moment her life turned to a new page, a page full of tragedy and despair. As someone who has gone through many ups and downs, this time, something inside her was broken. Mrs. Singh felt she was facing a sea of uncontrollable emotions. She has witnessed many scenes in life, but nothing compares to the feeling of despair when seeing others fighting for life. And now, it seems that all the obsessions, all the pain that she tried to bury, have all come back, stronger and more resilient than ever. She tried to keep her mind. But the memory of that tragic day was like a tsunami, knocking down all her resilience. Tears fell silently down her cheeks, not because of the physical pain but because of the mental burden she tried to shoulder. Standing on the sidelines of a room filled with tears and despair, Mrs. Singh wondered if these wounds could ever heal. Every step the doctors take, every beep of the machine, is not only an act of saving a life, but also a profound reminder of the fragility of life. When the police car lights flashed before her eyes, a painful memory seemed to be torn apart in Mrs. Singh's mind. Warm tears began to roll down her cheeks, each drop was a part of the pain and helplessness she had tried to bury. That day, what happened to Claire and everyone in the small house, became a deep wound in her heart, a wound that time has not healed. The moment the police car stopped in front of the house, marked a new chapter of both pain and hope. The officers appeared as saviors, bringing not only safety but also the beginning of the healing process. With their presence, Claire, while still young and fragile, was no longer alone in her battle against trauma. Mrs. Singh, with sad but grateful eyes, watched the officers do their job. They are calm and professional, but also not lacking in sympathy and kindness. In the small living room space, their voices rang out, not only as a word of reassurance but also as a promise of a better future. It is a bittersweet moment, a moment when emotions of joy are released and sadness is shared. Claire and the young student's family had to pay a heavy price for the events that happened, but now, they are no longer alone. In the darkness of the night, the lights of the police car not only illuminate the road ahead but also illuminate the hope in everyone's heart. Mrs. Singh, although still very worried and scared, began to feel a little reassured. The student and her child were protected, and she knew that, from this moment on, everything would be different. They have been welcomed by the community and those around them, ready to support and move forward together, despite all challenges. In the cold room of the hospital, Jenny lay motionless, curled up under a thin blanket. She had not regained consciousness since the accident, and all attempts to communicate were in vain. Mrs. Singh, her face wrinkled with worry, stood next to the hospital bed, staring at Jenny, filled with despair but no less determination. In the dark interrogation room of the police station, the light falling on the shiny table, Mrs. Singh sat across from an officer. This old woman, although exhausted, still tried to provide all the necessary information. She gave them all the papers, letters, bills, and even Jenny's personal notes, hoping they would help them find Mr. Morrison, whose husband had disappeared without a trace. "Miss Singh, we need to know where he is," the officer said, his voice serious, looking her straight in the eyes. "Any information you provide is important, but we need something more concrete to end this horror once and for all." Mrs. Singh looked down at her hands, the wrinkles on her forehead became deeper. She knew she did her best, but still felt it wasn't enough. She had tried to protect Jenny, had tried to keep everything from falling apart completely. Now, with both Jenny's fate and her family's safety hanging in the balance, she feels she is standing before an unbreakable wall. "We will find him," the officer promised, his voice filled with determination. "And we won't stop until we do that. You can help us by remembering anything about where he might have gone." Mrs. Singh nodded, her eyes sad but also full of hope. In that moment, she knew she was not alone in this battle. With the help of the police, perhaps they can finally find Mr. Morrison, bring justice for Jenny and for all they have endured. The price of silence is too high, and now is the time to act. As tensions gradually rose, Mrs. Singh made a suggestion that could be the key to opening the case: the administrative desk of the school where Jenny's children attended. She explained that schools typically keep necessary parent contact information to ensure student safety in the event of an emergency. They might have Mr. Morrison's work address, and if they're lucky, maybe even his home address, she told officers. The police officers immediately recognized the value of this information and prepared to approach the school immediately. This cooperation brings a new ray of hope, that they can find Mr. Morrison without waiting any longer. Meanwhile, at the hospital, another miracle was taking place. Just as Mrs. Singh stood up to leave the interrogation room, an urgent message came from the hospital: Jenny had regained consciousness. With the quick assistance of the nurse, Mrs. Singh rushed back to the hospital. When she entered the room, her eyes met Jenny's, realizing that the woman was awake. Mrs. Singh's heart jumped a beat, joy and relief mixed when she saw Jenny awake. The moment Jenny opened her eyes, it signaled a turning point in the fight to regain justice for her and her daughter. With Jenny awake, she can provide more information that could bring the police closer to finding Mr. Morrison. Meanwhile, officers have begun accessing new sources of information from the school, hoping for a breakthrough soon. Now, with Jenny awake, things seem to be moving in a more positive direction than ever. When Jenny Morrison woke up in the hospital, the police were ready to take a statement from her. Even though she was still weak and tired after a deep coma, her eyes shone with a clear ray of determination. Jenny knew that this was her chance to make things clear, not only for herself but also for her little girl. In the quiet hospital room, a police officer sat by the bed, the tape recorder was turned on, waiting for the words she was about to say. Jenny took a deep breath, looked thoughtful, and began to tell everything. She not only described the events that happened that day, but also revealed difficult and painful details that she had kept hidden for many years. She spoke clearly, every detail, without avoiding or hiding anything. When she got to the most important part, the room stopped breathing. She shared about a specific location where Mr. Morrison frequented, a clue that had never been mentioned before. "Do you know where we can find him?" the policeman asked, his voice filled with anticipation and pain as he realized the burden Jenny had endured. Jenny nodded, a thin smile appeared on her lips, tired but full of hope. "Yes," she said, "I know exactly where to find him." Jenny's testimony was not only a turning point for the investigation but also a major step forward on her recovery journey. With this valuable information, the police quickly mobilized forces, preparing to raid the location that Jenny had designated. Now, the hope is not only to find justice but also to restore a peaceful life for Jenny and her daughter. In the cold hospital room, the pale light shines on Jenny Morrison's face. A woman facing a fateful decision. Tears streamed down her cheeks, reflecting the pain and distraught she felt as she prepared to speak out about the man she once loved. Her lips trembled, swallowing the lump in her throat, opening to reveal a painful truth that she had kept hidden for so long. He's not the man I once knew anymore," Jenny exclaimed, her voice choking. "I can't continue to live in fear and pain anymore." The moment of truth has finally come, not only for Jenny but also for the detective who has persistently followed the case. Thanks to the information Jenny provided, they found Mr. Morrison's workplace. He was a cashier at a fish store near the lake, a secluded location accessible only by car. Without wasting another minute, the police quickly took action. They organized a quick and decisive raid on Mr. Morrison's workplace, so suddenly that he had no time to react. In the cold early morning air by the lake, the police arrested him, ensuring he could do no more harm. Meanwhile, at the hospital, a feeling of relief gradually spread in Jenny's heart. She knew that ending this relationship was necessary to protect herself and her daughter. Now that the police have assured her safety, Jenny feels she can begin to recover and rebuild her life, away from the ghosts of violence and fear she endured. When the police arrived at the fishing shop, the atmosphere suddenly became tense and terrifying. Sirens sounded shrilly, signaling their presence. Mr. Morrison, realizing that his life was threatened by just punishment, began to run through the shelves and past the bait boxes, rushing for an escape. "But there's nowhere to hide. Don't let that man escape." The policeman's scream echoed throughout the space, bouncing off the cold walls of the store. Morrison, in a desperate attempt to escape pursuit, slipped on a small puddle of water, falling hard onto the wet wooden floor. Immediately, a police officer rushed over and decisively restrained him. The brief struggle ended with Mr. Morrison being handcuffed and arrested. His actions had no place to hide, finally brought to light by the law. He was accused of domestic violence and abuse, with clear evidence and Jenny's testimony forming the foundation of the case. In the days that followed, while Mr. Morrison began to face the consequences of his actions behind bars, Jenny began the long journey towards healing. With her safety and that of her daughter assured, she has space to breathe, to recover and rebuild her life without the shadow of fear and suffering. Now, with the support of the community, friends and psychologists, Jenny is gradually finding herself and the strength to continue on a new path. In the new light of tomorrow, Jenny Morrison and her daughter Claire begin a difficult yet hopeful journey of recovery. The support from the community around them seems to be a solid wall surrounding mother and child, providing the warmth and safety they so desperately need right now. Social services quickly stepped in, providing Jenny and Claire with temporary accommodation, where they could leave their tumultuous and unstable lives behind. Mrs. Johnson, a local social worker, became Jenny's indispensable guide in finding the resources and support she needed. With patience and dedication, she connected Jenny with therapy and counseling programs where Jenny could share her pain, learn how to heal, and begin to rebuild a new life for herself and her children. Girl. Claire, even at a young age, began to see her inner strength through this process. The girl, from a quiet child oppressed by the darkness of domestic violence, has now gradually found her own voice. Claire's former quietness is gradually replaced by a resilient spirit, a strength that she learns not only from her personal experiences but also from the constant love and care of her mother and others. People around. Day by day, Jenny and Claire navigate each challenge of their new life together. Although each step may be thorny, with the support of the community and their own resilience, they begin to feel they are no longer alone. Both gradually regained the joy in life. A little every day, they rebuilt from the ruins a bright and peaceful future. In their small community, the story of Jenny, Claire and Mrs. Singh has become a living symbol of empathy and determination. Mrs. Singh, with her patience and courage, was not only a guide to Jenny and Claire, but also a shining beacon, illuminating the path out of the darkness of domestic violence. Their resilience has not only brought about change in their individual lives but also moved an entire community. Ms. Singh used Jenny and Claire's story as a catalyst, calling on everyone to take action together against abuse. Workshops, social media campaigns and community events have been organized to empower survivors to speak out and educate people about the importance of intervening when witnessing violence. Voices that were once silenced now find strength in the understanding and support of others. No longer ghosts in dark corners, victims of domestic violence gradually become central characters in their own stories, resiliently standing up against those who once made them afraid. Ms. Singh and her companions have created a network of empathy and support where each member can feel safe and understood. In the process, Jenny evolved from an abuse victim to a women's rights activist, using her story to motivate and inspire others. Claire, once a silent child, has now become a strong and confident girl, representing the next generation in the fight against violence. Their story resonated throughout the community, becoming a powerful reminder that change is possible, and no one needs to face violence alone. With each step, they not only rebuild their lives but also weave a safety net for others, building a future free from fear and suffering. In the quiet of the walls of their homes, many families have endured the unspeakable horror of domestic violence. Jenny Morrison, through her journey of healing and empowerment, has become a glimmer of light amidst the darkness, bringing hope and inspiration to others seeking to escape the cycle of violence. At first, Jenny felt embarrassed and afraid of people's judgmental eyes, but gradually, she learned to overcome her own fear. She is proud of herself. Having persevered through the most painful days, and day after day, she fights for the safety and happiness of her daughter, Claire. Every step Jenny takes is not only a journey to heal herself but also a steady step towards a brighter future for her little daughter. In the environment of the small school where Claire studied, the courage and compassion of Mrs. Singh, who did not hesitate to stand up for Jenny and Claire, became an endless source of inspiration. She spread her steadfast spirit and compassion, impacting not only the lives of Jenny and Claire but also countless other students at the school. Mrs. Singh has become a symbol of strength and kindness, encouraging every child to dare to stand up and speak out against injustice and violence. Jenny's story and Ms. Singh's support have sparked a new wave in the community. Discussions about domestic violence began to expand, and many people found the strength to share their own stories. From parent-teacher conferences to community workshops, from social media campaigns to fundraising events, Jenny's story has become a voice for many other silent victims, promoting a strong movement of awareness and action. Jenny, once a victim, has now become a leader in the fight against domestic violence. She not only healed herself but also reached beyond, becoming a guiding force for positive change, bringing hope and strength to those seeking a way out of the darkness of suffering and fear. Scared, Mrs. Singh, with her dedication and tireless dedication to her students, became a powerful force of change not only in Claire's life but also in her entire family. Through every lesson and every conversation, she instilled hope and resilience in the minds of her students. Under her guidance, the pain and trauma that once shadowed the lives of Jenny and Claire's family have gradually dissipated, making way for an open future, filled with love and support. Warm. Mrs. Singh was not only a teacher, but also a companion, a guide, lighting their path with the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The story of her and Jenny's family is a living testament to the power of compassion and the spirit of never giving up. If stories of courage, compassion and hope are what you seek, don't hesitate to follow our channel. Subscribe today to discover more inspiring stories, lessons of resilience, and shining examples of healing and support. Join us in sharing this light and opening our arms to those who need a word of encouragement, a ray of hope in their journey.